All right, thanks for joining us here. I am joined by Dr. Shefali Tsabary. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. I'm a parent myself, and so when we first talked, and I just had a real interest in, I guess, your philosophy, and you're certainly an expert on a few different things: personal development and family dynamics. You're a published author, a New York Times best-selling author. That's something certainly to celebrate. Thanks for being here.
I'm so excited to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
So, parenting in my household, I'm a dad of a couple young toddlers. It comes up every single day. Our philosophy, my wife and I discuss it all the time. I'm sure that really all parents who are watching feel similarly. Let me just start with this. What took you down the path of what you do and what brought you here?
Well, first, I'm a clinical psychologist, so I do therapy with hundreds of adults. And sadly, tragically, I find that all the issues go back to their childhood. So I began to get very interested and curious about the dynamics of what happens in those early years that set the foundation for your entire life. And then I became a mom and I saw firsthand, this is the problem. And what the problem is that we carry these patterns from our childhood, and the adult, the parent, creates coping mechanisms to handle and survive their own childhood that they now put on their child. So, what happens is that they do not connect to the child before them, but instead are reacting to the child based on their own childhood. And here is where it all gets messed up. And pain and trauma gets passed down generation by generation.
How hard are these patterns to change? It seems like to me that it takes a lot of self-reflection to know what trauma you may be dealing with, so that you can be the best version of yourself as a parent.
Well, what I teach is how to awaken. And to awaken means to go through this process of realizing, of becoming aware that your life is not happening to you. We think that we are just reactors to life. But this work of self growth, which is so important, so powerful, allows you to begin to see that you are actually co creating your reality. And becoming aware of your patterns is the first step. The second step is a lifelong journey to break them. It's really difficult to break them, but when you begin to you begin to have self empowerment, that you can take your life and the emotions that you have in your own control, and then you can help your children manage their emotions in such a powerful way. So, this process of growing up, of awakening, is really the main thing we should be teaching at schools and the main thing we should be working on so that we suffer less.
What does that look like? Because my wife and I were talking just last night. I have a 3.5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and when you say emotions, we deal with a lot of emotions in our household. At that age, it's just one emotion after another and multiple meltdowns every day. And of course, sometimes we're proud of how we interact with our toddlers through those experiences, and other times we lose our patience, and then we kind of beat ourselves up over that. So I feel like there's probably a lot of parents who can identify with that. We had the thought, are we messing up our kids last night? We both felt that way, and I'd like to think the answer is no, but what would you say to parents who are trying to navigate that?
Well, little children especially don't have the verbal faculties. They're not articulate about their emotions. Even adults are not. So, little children definitely don't have words. So, they express their distress, they cry for help through tears. And when we adults see that, it creates impatience in us. It frustrates us. It makes us feel like we are not in control because we're not in control. So it brings to the fore all our emotionality, all our immaturity, and we have a tantrum, right? So it's such a great teacher to have young children because they teach us to stay calm, to stay grounded, to not get attached to power and to domination, and to release control. These are beautiful spiritual teachings, but when we are exhausted, it is really impossible. So then it teaches parents to have better self care, to slow down, and to stay in the moment. That's what young children teach us better than anyone.
So you use the term, and it's the title of one of your New York Times best-selling books, A Conscious Parent, the term conscious parenting. What I see a lot of these days, everywhere I look on social media, and maybe it's a similar term with maybe a more intentional word used, is gentle parenting. Are those the same things? And maybe could you describe what you mean when you say a conscious parent?
Sure. So I teach conscious parenting, which includes gentle parenting. To become conscious is not just to be gentle, that's one big aspect of it. But conscious parenting is really for the parent to become aware and conscious that they are bringing their childhood patterns into the parent child dynamic. And it is not fair for our children to be the receivers of our childhood baggage. So, the greatest gift you can give your children is to become conscious of your patterns and work on your patterns so you release your children. You know, you and I grew up as pawns and prey to our parents' unconscious patterns because they did not work on themselves. So, my work is this profound awakening that I challenge parents to go through so they do not dump their patterns on their children. And this is the greatest gift you can give your children, where they are free of your baggage and your crap so that they can grow into themselves. Now, this is the most beautiful freedom, permission we can give our children to be themselves.
So I imagine you get a lot of parents coming to you saying, you know, my kid just doesn't, and you're immediately like, no, hold on. Let's start somewhere different. Does that happen all the time? I imagine it does.
All the time, parents come to me hoping that I will fix their kid, and they are in utter shock that the issue is not in their child, it's in their belief systems and their way of reacting. All our interpretations of life and our children come from one place only, our patterns, which come from our mind. And when I help parents to shift, their entire interpretation changes, and then their entire approach changes, and then they connect to their children better. My approach, this approach, the conscious parenting approach, works 100% of the time. It just requires a very brave parent to be wanting to do this work for their children.
And probably to accept that they have shortcomings, which a lot of times, especially depending on your background, would be difficult for adults to do. I mean, we're all here as parents and we have careers and we like to think of ourselves as successful and maybe without flaws, at least subconsciously. So, I mean, how do you get parents to buy into that, especially as, you know, it's just so easy to pin. And I guess, like, for me, I'm pretty proud of how I was brought up, and I'm proud of the way my parents parented me, and yet maybe my baggage is showing itself when I lose my patience with my toddlers. I mean, is it fair to say that everybody's got baggage, regardless of how you feel about how your life is going and how you were brought up?
Yes, I don't want to burst your bubble, but I'm sorry to say that everybody has baggage. And that is so beautiful because we get to grow. But when we think that it was perfect, that's when we're in big trouble, because our children will bust that bubble of perfectionism. And that's where our impatience comes from, because we are under this illusion that we are kind of put together and we're superior and we have power, and we don't have power with our children. But the beautiful thing about this work is that when you begin to do your inner work and you begin to release your children to be themselves, what happens is that you empower them to be their most resilient and worthy. Most of us adults are suffering from a dearth of worth, and it all stems from childhood. And because of that impoverishment from childhood, we are addicts to looking for this worth on the outside. And when we do conscious parenting, we shift that dynamic, and our children grow up more resilient, more worthy, more secure within themselves. So it's a very powerful approach. And the way I get parents to shift is they begin to see that it's not working. Their way is not working. And they come to me often at the last resort begging for help because their children are falling apart, or there's a huge rift in their relationship and they want to heal that.
What are some tips, and maybe you've shared some of those just on a more macro level, that you can give to parents to try to break this cycle if they're willing to admit that they do have that baggage and they want to look within themselves? What are some things that somebody watching right now could try to put into play immediately without having read your entire book or maybe going to one of your classes?
Well, I can say the tip, but it's not going to come easy because it's not about drinking water or doing the dumbbell technique correctly. This is about a mental shift. And the first question parents need to ask themselves is, what does this dynamic say about me? What does my child's behavior say about me? How is my relationship with my child reflecting my inner state? It's about turning the spotlight within. So as soon as we want to project on our partner or our child, we flip the question and turn it to ourselves. That flip is the hardest thing to get people to do in the moment because we're so used to blaming and externalizing responsibility.
Yeah, I think in control is a word that comes up a lot too, that you've touched on as well. I know you have an event coming up here in Atlanta. Tell us a little bit about it, Evolve 2022. What can people expect? How can they learn more information?
So I'm so excited to be bringing my annual summit where I teach conscious parenting and mindful living to your city, Atlanta. It's October 21st to 23rd. Parents and non-parents, hundreds are gathering to learn the techniques and strategies of conscious parenting and living. So if you are interested in changing your life, in breaking your patterns, in connecting with your children, in raising resilient and empowered children, then you have to come learn. You have to go to school. And this is going to be a 3-day summit school for you to gather with me and others in Atlanta. It's at the Westin Hotel downtown. Tickets are on my website. They're selling out. You can go to DR for Dr. Shefali.com and you can post that up there.
How many people do you take at these summits?
Around 500 people will come because that's a good number where people can interact. We have people from all over the world coming, and it's lively enough, but it's also intimate where we do a lot of deep work. People leave the summit changed, and often parents don't give themselves the time for self-growth, but without self-growth we are running on empty and we cannot show up for our children. So if you're a parent or a person who wants to grow and change your patterns and empower yourself and your children, then come to Evolve. It's right in Atlanta, and I hope to see many of you there.
Is it fair to say that parents come out of this whether they thought they needed it or not, with a sense of healing?
Yes, and every parent needs it. Every parent needs to become better at parenting. Parenting is not something that we just naturally know how to do. It's something we have to cultivate and learn strategies to deal with these children who are out of control. And so I help parents with very concrete strategies, and every parent can do better.
It's funny that you say they're out of control. I agree with that in some respects, and then I also say, no, they're in control of me, is what really is going on in our household, at least sometimes it feels like. That's a lot of great information, Dr. Shefali. Thank you so much for sharing that, and certainly wish you all the best at your Evolve 2022 event coming up. Of course, we'll have that in our website and web story as well.
I'm so happy to be here. I hope to see many of you from Atlanta there, and thank you for having me.